In March 2026, a trail camera on a rocky slope in the Sky Island Mountains of southern Arizona captured footage that wildlife researchers had spent 60 years telling themselves would never come. A jaguar, walking, alive, on American soil, not a carcass drifted in from Mexico, not a disputed heat signature. A fully grown male, moving deliberately across terrain that no confirmed breeding female has occupied since 1963. The University of Arizona's Wildcat Research and Conservation Center reviewed the footage. Then they reviewed it again. Then they gave him a name, Cinco, the fifth individual wild jaguar documented in the United States in the last 15 years. And the fact that he is the fifth, that there have been 4 before him, all male, all crossing the same corridor, all photographed and named and studied, and then watched as they disappeared, is the detail that makes this something other than a conservation win. Because none of them stayed, none of them could. The last confirmed female jaguar in the United States was killed in the White Mountains of Arizona in 1963. She was not the victim of a lone poacher. She was the logical endpoint of a decades-long federal program. The US Bureau of Biological Survey ran systematic predator control campaigns across the American Southwest from the early 1900s through the mid-20th century. Government agents, federal bounties, strychnine laid across desert terrain, traps and rifles deployed with a mandate whose explicit purpose was the removal of apex predators from the American landscape. By the time the last female fell in 1963, the jaguar was not missing from the United States. It had been removed, deliberately, at public expense. What no one planned for was what happens when the animal you erased starts walking back. Panthera, the jaguar, is the largest cat in the Western Hemisphere and the only member of the Panthera genus native to the Americas. Before the extermination campaigns, its range extended from Patagonia in the south all the way north through the American Southwest. Historical records place jaguars at the Grand Canyon. 19th century accounts document them in Louisiana, California, Texas, and New Mexico. They were not visitors, they were residents. The United States government spent the better part of a century removing every last one. The first documented return came in 1996. A hunter in the Paloncillo Mountains of southeastern Arizona photographed an animal he initially mistook for an oversized mountain lion. Wildlife biologists confirmed it was a jaguar, the first scientifically documented individual in the US in over 30 years. Since then, 9 individuals have been confirmed, all male, all moving north from a breeding population in Sonora, Mexico, roughly 150 miles south of Tucson. They arrive, they stay for months or years. They are photographed, named, studied. Then the cameras go quiet. Jefe spent years in the Santa Rita Mountains south of Tucson. He became the subject of international conservation campaigns, the living proof the corridor still worked. He disappeared from Arizona cameras in 2015. In November 2020, one conservation groups confirmed a photograph of him alive in central Sonora, Mexico, 120 miles south of his last US sighting. He had walked home. But here is what that story actually means, and this is the part most coverage of Jefe never addressed. He walked back because there was nothing in Arizona for a male jaguar to stay for. No female, no breeding opportunity, no future. He occupied the territory, established his range, and eventually his biology demanded what the landscape could not provide. Cinco arrived in November 2025. Trail cameras operated by the University of Arizona have now captured him 17 times. Researchers use a specific term for his behavior, site fidelity. He returns to the same water sources, the same corridors, the same slopes. He is not passing through. He is treating this landscape as home, and there are still no confirmed females, not one in 60 years. In ecology, male dispersal is a precise signal. When a population grows beyond its territory's carrying capacity, it produces surplus males who are forced outward to find new ground. These dispersers move into unfamiliar terrain, establish range, and in a functioning ecosystem, females follow. That is how species expand. That is how ranges recover. The male arrives first, the female follows, but the female can only follow if the corridor stays open. Close the corridor and the disperser becomes a dead end, a name on a research database, a trail camera file that eventually stops updating. This is where the story stops being about a single animal. A 27-mile border wall segment is currently under construction through the San Rafael Valley. a stretch of open grassland and canyon terrain in southeastern Arizona, sitting between the Huachuca and Patagonia mountain ranges. Conservation scientists and federal wildlife biologists have identified this specific corridor as one of the last remaining passable routes for large mammals moving between Mexico and the United States. Not one of the best roads, one of the last. The Center for Biological Diversity has filed legal challenges against the construction. The Sky Island Alliance has produced fragmentation data covering ocelots, black bears, and jaguars. The Tohono O'odham Nation, whose ancestral territory spans both sides of the border and whose cultural relationship with the jaguar predates the United States itself, has documented opposition on ecological and cultural grounds. Cinco crossed before that segment closed. The next male may not have the same opportunity. Here is the number that reframes everything. A 2020 national census in Mexico documented 5,326 jaguars, a 30% increase from the 2010 count. The Mexican population is recovering. That recovery is precisely why males are dispersing north. A growing population produces pressure at its edges. Surplus individuals move outward following ancient corridors their ancestors used for thousands of years, crossing into terrain where the prey exists and the habitat is structurally sufficient, except there is no mate. The global jaguar population is estimated at approximately 170,000 individuals. The IUCN classifies the species globally as near threatened, a designation that conceals a more fractured reality. The Amazon basin subpopulation, holding the vast majority of those animals, is relatively stable, but most of the 34 identified subpopulations across the rest of the jaguar's range are classified as endangered or critically endangered. The northern subpopulations, the animals crossing into Arizona, are among the most isolated and the most vulnerable to permanent separation from any viable breeding pool. Cinco keeps returning. He demonstrates site fidelity in a landscape that has not had a breeding jaguar in 60 years, and the corridor that would allow recovery to proceed is being closed on a construction timeline that does not account for what is crossing it. There are two ways to read what is happening in southern Arizona. The first is optimistic. The jaguar is returning on its own, not because any recovery program placed it here, but because the animal is following its biology into terrain its species has always used. The Sky Island habitat is structurally sufficient. The prey base, white-tailed deer, javelina, cotis, can support a large predator. The corridor is damaged but not fully severed, with protection of remaining passage points and legal pressure on further construction. Females could follow, not in years, possibly in decades, but the biological pathway for recovery is still technically open. The second reading requires sitting with something harder. Male jaguars dispersing north without females is not evidence of recovery. It is evidence of pressure. A growing Mexican population produces males that must go somewhere. They go north because north has space. They cross the border. The wall closes behind them. No females follow. Each individual that cannot breed and cannot return is a genetic dead end, and each trail camera detection, each photograph, each name given to each animal, documents not a recovery but a pattern of arrival and disappearance that has now repeated 9 times without a single breeding outcome in 60 years. Cinco will be photographed again. The cameras are running. The researchers are watching. What no camera can document is whether he is the beginning of something or the 9th iteration of a pattern that ends the same way every time.